it's kind of living through a crisis every day. Nobody else knows the horrors of that as well as each other. And
Yeah.
as much as people imagine we're so competitive and you are with a story, but there's this real camaraderie that develops. And I feel the same way about you. I woke up to you every day for years. So
No,
hi.
you're so right. I mean, that camaraderie was something I never expected. I thought it was going to be the most competitive news beat you could imagine, and sure there was some of that, but I mean, we just had each other's backs flying around the country and the world and not sleeping and trying to keep each other sane most of the
And
time
awake. Yeah.
and
And fed.
and awake. Um, but so you made this decision, and I mean, I'm not just excited to share your reflections on this with everyone, but for me personally, I mean, I just left NPR 5 weeks ago, so I'm still in a state of weird, surreal denial. Did I do the right thing? I did the right thing. I don't have any regrets leaving a big institution that felt, so safe, like being part of something big. And I mean, I would love to start there. Like, was there a moment? Was there an epiphany? Had you been thinking for a long time, kind of carving out a new course, doing this on your own? Like, take us through the thought process, in the time that you transitioned from this fabulous career at these well-known institutions to doing what you're doing today.
First of all, you did the right thing and
Thank
you
you.
should take a vacation. And
Thank you.
then you'll have perspective and we can talk.
Yeah.
Um, for me, it was a lot of, I got into journalism because I thought I kind of was a millennial. I should have been a millennial. And I grew up in a household that was super do well, do good. And I really thought that journalism was a way to like be successful, but also really, really give back. And I had this ongoing experience that what I was doing every day with my personal career didn't speak to the things I wanted, the ways I wanted to move the needle. And like specifically as a political reporter, I spent all this time, as you know, chasing undecided voters. Like during a campaign, you spend the last 6 months only talking to undecided voters,
That's it. No one
right?
else.
Because there's like no one else matters.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that's a thing in itself. And overwhelmingly, they were women. And I'd go back to home base, you'd be out in the country, you go back home, and I'd be like, I really think we need to do our stories a little bit differently because it's not resonating. And the conventional wisdom in Washington is always like, the swing voters, they don't give a shit about politics. They don't care. They're disengaged. If you look at data, it shows women follow human interest stories and not politics and international relations. These women just don't care. And I had this like conversations with them all the time. We're not speaking in a way they hear. They care enormously. But especially when it's different for you at NPR. You did like a lot of substance. I was in an environment where we did a lot of political brawling, right? Rhetoric. And it was at a time when we were used to be doing lots of stories in the field, but started to be doing a lot of panel discussions in the studio. And the whole drama was like, where's the fight? Or as the producers used to say, who's going to bring the heat?
Huh.
And
You would say that. I mean, that would actually be words
oh,
spoken
dude.
in the studio.
Like I would find a member of Congress who is like so smart and didn't get any airtime and could like explain a policy really well and say, we got to get them on air. And I'd be told, will they bring the heat? Will they throw it down?
Wow.
And if not, they don't get airtime. And I was like, we can't like, I always justified it because like I'm a driven competitive person. Like when I get a bigger title, when I'm more influential, I can do the things I believe in. And it kept getting further, like I'd rise and that would get further out of my reach because whatever the pressures of the internet or ratings or blah, blah, blah. And I kind of had one of those life existential moments where I'm like, I can stay or I can go. But if I stay, I'm going to keep doing, like, I can't fool myself into thinking I'm ever going to get to do that thing. And I really wanted to do the news, like, as I say, in a different voice.
Mm-hmm.
And I had this feeling that if I could do that, it could engage these undecided voters. It could like genuinely empower people to feel like they have more control over their life and participate and vote. So I did it.
So that's what you mean by moving the needle, like give people something substantive that helps them make a decision more intelligently or change their life in some way. Is that what you felt like you were missing before?
I mean, we would go on air and say, the votes aren't there. It's going to go to reconciliation. Pelosi's in a huddle and this isn't happening. You're not getting your $1,400 check. And people are like, I don't know why I'm not getting my $1,400 check.
Yeah.
What did you just say? It's like sometimes the news felt like walking into a dinner party 10 minutes after it started. And you're like, what's that person talking about? Why is this? And it impacts your life, but people, like the surveys, I've done surveys now, show huge part of the audience feels less informed after watching TV news than before, because we're talking about these big ideas but not explaining. Like the example is just tell someone what a tariff is before you do a trade war story.
That seems so basic, but how often does that happen?
It doesn't happen. And you need to define the terms all the time to engage people. And you can do it quickly and you can do it without being demeaning. And it engages a different audience. So one of the things is like, can we use less jargon? But the other thing is like my whole career as a TV reporter, I was always told to ramp up the panic. Like you were at the White House for NPR. I was at the White House for TV News. And I would be on the North Lawn as a baby reporter and they'd come in my ear and they'd say, urgency, intensity, panic, go.
Wow. I just can't, I don't know. I sort of thought that was going on, but hearing you actually say that those words were being spoken into your ear is really, it's jarring.
And it's no wonder then that people feel triggered by the news. Our assumption is that you feel triggered by the news because the news is scary. But my contention is it's deliberately crafted to, I say, compete for your anxiety, to trigger a fear and panic response. Because like any industry that's ripe for disruption, it has one thesis on how to succeed. And the thesis is conflict wins eyeballs. And I think conflict is one way to win eyeballs, but empathy is another. And empathy is more calming. Empathy creates community. And my whole thing was like, can I explain what we're talking about, make complicated ideas simple, and trigger an empathy response so people care, feel safe, and engage?
Well, to me, part of that is the connection that you make. Like there's an intimacy as if I am sitting with a really smart friend talking about what happened today. And I was watching some cable news today, looking at the impeachment trial coverage and then watched your coverage. And it really is like, noise is definitely something that you find not nearly, not at all when you're listening to you, which is, but that doesn't even capture all of it. Like there's a connection that I feel that you make. There's a humanity, there's an authenticity, there's a humbleness. Even some of the things you do where you're like, messing around and forgetting a phone number that you were going to give to people. I really remember that. It's like, it's so human. And I think that is how it seems like you really develop this trust.
That is true. Part of it's, so when I started in TV news, I was a one-man band reporter in Orlando, Florida, which is crazy because I'm from LA and I didn't know a soul there. Like I airdropped in, they gave me a camera. That was before iPhones. So they gave me a physical map and I'd have to drive myself around, set up, shoot my own interviews, drive home, log them, write the piece, edit it, and put it on air.
The glamour of television news.
So it was like training to do what I'm doing now, which is all the things. And there is a humility in going from being chief White House correspondent at CNN to sitting in I was sitting in my house talking to my phone before the pandemic. So it's humbling.
Now we all know what that feels like.
Yeah, right?
Well, are there some days where you miss having the institution and all of that, all of what that brings?
Yeah. So the thing I miss the most is are my colleagues and the camaraderie. And like when I was at CNN, I sat in between Gloria Borger and Dana Bash, and they were my everyday. And you're working on a story and you just pop into Gloria's office and Dana's and say, what do you think this direction, that? Here, can I run this by you? You don't have that. I have a kitchen cabinet I've assembled of reporter friends. And now that you're solo, I might add you to it and I'll be yours.
Cabinet, be an honor.
But still, it's like the best part is that I get to decide every day what counts as news. And the worst part is that I have to decide every day what counts as news. Some days, as you know, it's really hard. Like some days, didn't you just want to get an assignment?
Yeah. I mean, that's a lot of pressure. I mean, is it exhausting? Like it having that, I mean, all of the responsibility on your own shoulders? Like you can't turn to a producer or a Dana Bash or someone. I mean, it's not just bouncing ideas. It's like that responsibility in the decision making. It is all on you.
Yeah, and all the resources like you get it with these institutions. I mean, it is magnificent the reach. You know, CNN can get into any war zone, crisis spot. They have all the data. They have access. Just you can pick up a phone and reach someone anywhere to get information. And it is like a withdrawal process to not have that. And I honestly have CNN and MSNBC and Fox on all day long. So you know, I do and engage, and you know, you're the same, I'm sure. After all these years, you have just a way of ingesting all the news all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And people ask, how do you decide? What do you read? I'm like, I don't know. I'm like a roving vacuum. Right?
It's a
And,
good way to put it. It's just sucking up whatever you can anywhere.
right? And I still, you know, use sources and all that. But yeah, it's super isolating. And I think this is the challenge of the trend toward independent journalism is it gives you more of a voice, it gives you more freedom, but it's also quite isolating. And I always think about where's the future headed? Is there a way to sort of have a combined force of different independent journalists who can sort of support each other as opposed to everybody being atomized and really on their own?
Well, I wanted to ask you about this. It's almost like a paradoxical tension. I mean, you say independent journalism, and I think two things that feel completely at odds. Like it's independent journalism is what you have done. You've shown that you don't need to be part of the noise. You don't need to be part of the panic as you're describing it. All the things that we all like, I mean, just feel all this about when we're watching, you know, on a day when it doesn't even seem that newsy. It's like, you know, you turn on the news at 6 o'clock and it's like, stop. Like, I want to be calm. Like, just like, so you've just obviously tapped into like what people genuinely want, what a lot of people genuinely want today, not the noise, not the panic. They want to develop trust in one person like you and turn to you every day. But then we also talk about that we're in this age where anyone can be a journalist. And that's sort of terrifying because, you know, there's a reason that this profession exists, right? There's a reason that you and I got in this profession because not everyone can report. It's like, you know, there are editors who have gone through years of training. There are reporters who have gone through years of training to have news judgment, to understand what's important, to be fair, to be balanced. So how do we create space for you to do this great stuff while also letting people know they can't just go trust anyone who pops up on their feed?
It's part of the challenge it's the challenge of our world right now and of social media. I think it's a little too late. Like Alex Jones was the first. People who follow Alex Jones believe that he's an independent journalist, I think.
Yeah.
People who follow Glenn Beck believe the same. And then take that across the spectrum, you know, from whoever's reporting on QAnon stuff to, you know, more own, you know, the future Trump network-ish environment. So there's never been a credentialing process for journalism. And we always trusted these institutions to give it to us. I think that, you know, I'm hopeful that more people who are trained journalists enter this space and sort of because of their presence and their heft, occupy a lot of it and show people what journalism looks like. But I don't know, it's a little bit like, you know, once Napster is out there, you can't undo that to the music industry.
Right.
I think that it's just promising that people do have trust in people who are real journalists. And then you ask, like, what is a real journalist? Like, I didn't take a test to get my job at my first news org, right? Like, you just had your 10,000 hours.
Yeah.
And one of the things I do on my Insta page is, in addition to coming on and doing videos, I also kind of do a news digest every day of what the important stories are by posting articles and stories, and then I annotate them. So I'm like providing context on top of institutional news. And I think it's doing two things. One is it's causing the audience to look at news and think, what's the larger context? Because I'm literally annotating it every day. And then also, I'm directing them to trusted sources. So I use only trust sources I trust in the stories gallery without ever saying these are places you trust. It is mainstream news orgs. It's also, Lawfare or 538, slightly places we know. But I think that as we create this ecosystem, we are the ones who can kind of tell our audience, you can trust this. This is a reliable source. I personally don't trust this source. And I'm always like, do what you want. I don't trust it.
But do you think we can get back to a time where there is a widely accepted, from all parts of the political spectrum, like a widely accepted definition for who or what is a trusted source? Like it feels like you and I could say like these are trusted sources, but you brought up some journalists who people will listen to and they're not going to question it. They're not sitting there being like, should I trust Alex Jones? Should I not? Should I maybe go to Jessica Yellen instead? What is wrong with the climate, and what can we do to change that, if anything?
I think that part of, we're struggling as a globe with this concept of shared facts. How do we get back to shared facts? I think part of the challenge or the goal is to train people in truth discernment. And that's something that is actually being studied. Like I've interviewed a few people who are working on it, and it's about helping people do what I was talking about, see the context, give them information, don't force it on them, explain to them, this is what I think, here's why. If they come back at you, with I have these other facts that I've gotten from QAnon, whatever, query it without challenging it. Like there are strategies that we're learning, but I think it's not an easy solution. And as long as, the social media platforms are doing what they're doing and we are in this politically polarized environment, it's not going to get better just through these strategies we're talking about. Like we need to reform the social media platforms, and we need leaders that talk about uniting us. And even then, I don't know where we end up.
What advice do you think we can give to people to avoid getting stuck in an echo chamber? That feels like that is happening more and more often. I find even people who don't even realize they're in echo chambers, you sit with them for 30 seconds and they tell you where they're getting the news and who they're talking to about the news. And I'm like, my God, like you don't have an open mind at all. Is there something that we can do as journalists to change that?
Part of it's the way we talk, apparently. Like it's literally about rejiggering the language we use and the way we frame things. I encourage people to follow, here are a few accounts, like follow people you don't believe in. Just follow things you don't believe so you can at least see what another point of view is.
Yeah.
I've at periodic times gotten blowback because I follow this account or that account, and how could you give them a follow? And I explain I'm a journalist. I want to know what the conversation is. And, I'm told you must unfollow so-and-so because, social media is a little different. It's like perceived as an endorsement. So I model that. I don't know, I've seen some of these new inventions that, people who are troubled by this trend are trying to correct by giving individual journalists a grade on if you're left or right based on your Twitter following, which is a ridiculous way to measure what your actual output is. Like those two don't correlate. I've talked to tech people who want to blockchain facts so that you can go back and verify where each fact came from. And I was like, well, you explain why that's not going to work. At some point, we have to trust that, humans want to live in a functioning society. And at some point, there'll be enough mutual interest for us to find common ground to function well together. I have to believe that. And I think the more we have conversations like this, the more it teaches more people to go out and proselytize, like, and try to, if everybody watching now goes after this and finds 3 accounts on each of your social media platforms you loathe and follow them so you know what else is being said, it helps to open your mind a little.
Yeah.
I don't know. What do you think the solution is?
I mean, I've been puzzling over it. I mean, it's so hard because it has been so at the heart of what I do as a journalist to almost force people to hear different perspectives. And for a long time, I felt like people valued that and they liked that. In the last few years, I mean, I get pummeled, and I take it and it's like, this is my job. I have to do this. But, the criticism can so quickly jump to, I don't want to be hearing this. Why should I be hearing this? Why are you putting a hater on the air? This is not why I come to NPR. And it worries me deeply, like that people jump to that reaction so quickly instead of being like, maybe that was a little too hateful, but I get what you're trying to do. It's become like we've offended them by exposing people to different views, and that's deeply worrying.
But do you think journalism had a unique challenge during the Trump years because he, let's just say, lied so frequently that it required that journalists are constantly calling that out, and it made it seem as though reporters were in opposition to the president and therefore partisan. And so it created a unique dynamic. If he's removed from the picture, if you have different leadership, does that change the landscape where journalists have more space to show multiple sides and not be seen as the opposition or the ally of a certain party?
I mean, that is my hope, that Trump was such a unique figure because, he basically declared war on the truth, and our profession is all about the truth. And so we constantly had to be fighting for the truth, which, as you just said, made it look like we were fighting constantly and being activists against him and everything he stood for. So that I'm hoping that tension was in some large part created by just a very unique presidency. But, at the same time, we've all been talking about that these underlying forces in the country, this not having shared facts, those are not things that are going to just disappear, which is really scary. I wonder what do you know about your audience? Like, would you call them an echo chamber? Do you feel like they come from all different backgrounds and disagree on stuff?
It's interesting. They disagree on specific topics. So I have a lot of parents and I have a lot of teachers. And whenever I do a story on school reopening, both sides are enraged because, the parents are enraged the teachers won't go back to school and are being so selfish and the kids aren't learning. And the teachers are enraged that no one cares that they haven't had vaccines and they can't. So though it's issue specific, I have that. There's, I'm very aligned. Like I report science and facts, and you're allowed to be here if you're anti-vax, but I don't have time or space to talk about, like, that's not I don't entertain that. And I have anti-vax people in the audience. So I understand that some people hold those beliefs quite forcefully, and that's your prerogative. I'm just not going to engage it. So that becomes a fight. I had a lot of people who were Trump voters in 2016 and then became Biden-Harris in 20. And in that process, there was a lot of conflict, sort of as they were, they were grappling with that choice. So some of that and some of that continues to play out. And there's new divisions that emerge as well. But my audience is definitely it's not MAGA. There's not dedicated Trump supporters. They would never engage with what I do, and it's okay with me.
I think we just have a few minutes left before we go into the breakout. I wonder, the thing that I struggled with so much in recent times, and no one will be surprised by this, was disinformation about this election. Like, the number of times that I would say on the air that the president is lying and trying to overturn a democratic election, but feel like I was inadvertently spreading disinformation by telling Americans that the president was saying that this election was not fair. I mean, it kept me up at night. I think that so often, especially with a figure like Donald Trump, just by elevating his voice, we are spreading disinformation. Like, how did you handle that, and what lessons did you take that maybe can help us in moments like this in the future?
Well, I'll tell you, I had your exact anxiety where there was one day where I kept trying to sort of massage how I said what he was saying, what he was doing. And then one day I was like, he is trying to install himself as our unelected leader. That is what is happening.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that. Like, I tortured myself about it, but then I was like, the whole reason I'm on my own is because I can say what I think is true. So I'm doing it. But it was agonizing. So what I did is, because I'm on social media, I end up seeing a lot of the conspiracy theories, the QAnon stuff earlier than it's actually in the news. Like, people were blowing me up about why am I not reporting on all the missing children and all the pedophilia a year ago. And so I started talking to people who study disinformation and study QAnon to actually ask them, what are you supposed to do? What works? And they gave me a couple of tips. One is, fact checking is not an effective way to refute disinformation. It's sometimes it can be after you're engaged in a conversation with a person who's somewhat open, then you can do it. The first is because you don't want to repeat the lie. Even the repetition of it embeds it in their memory as a factoid that they draw on later, disconnected from whether they remember it was true or false. They say the most effective thing to do are two things. Ask them, why do you think this information is out there? Who's benefiting from this? Go big, like, what's the motive behind it? And then the other thing is to ask a question that might cause them to mull about it in the future. Like, so I see that, and what bothers me is I've never found evidence that this thing is true that they're saying. Bill Gates is putting a chip in you. Like, where's the original source of the chip? I've never found it. And you don't say it's wrong, because then they immediately defend themselves. You say, I'm bothered by it. I don't know. And you move on and you let it turn in their head. And that's the most effective way. It's inform, don't persuade is the headline way they've described it.
That's really, I think, helpful. I am still traumatized by the injecting Lysol into your veins.
That's amazing.
I mean, seriously, it was. I mean, there was a big fight. It was like, don't put those words on the air. And other people said, no, like, air it over and over again, and let's fact check it and have doctors saying this is why you shouldn't inject Lysol. I mean, it was crazy. Like, and I was just stunned that we were put in that position. But it really, like, the risks are enormous if you just throw stuff out into the world.
I think it's uniquely different when it's from the president, and that you are justified in airing it because this is the president. It's different when it's something that's circulated from Parler and you're getting it in DM, in social media. But when it's the president saying that, I do think it's going to get out there anyway, so you may as well fact check it. Also,
okay, go ahead.
Anyway.
Yeah, my last question. Do you feel? I mean, I've been talking to a lot of friends in the journalism field, even those who, I mean, especially those who cover the White House, and they're like, "Wow, like, it's so quiet." Like, what do we, like, the lid, which is the time that the White House says there's no more news, is like at 4 p.m. How should we fill this space, do you think?
Oh my God. I don't know. Are people losing their minds a little bit? Are they bored? Can you hear me?
Yeah. Like,
are people bored? Are former colleagues there bored?
I'm not bored, but sort of like, I think it was just, you were in this mode for so long that there would be a tweet at 10 p.m. or, that the news would be made by one person. It's refreshing, but it's almost like you have to realign yourself in some way.
Well, I think we all have
great,
PTSD. We have a little PTSD, and it's like now everybody has to start processing what's happened over the last 4 years. And the thing that I think an audience can understand, but you don't really know it until you're a reporter, is like, you internalize the stuff you're talking about and then you filter it and put it out. And so I really think we take in a lot of that, and it's emotionally hard. And we get really inured to it and we act tough, but at some point it comes home to roost. And so now is the time to kind of find a way to deal with it and process it. I sound very California, but it's also true. I know. And I think it's time to, now we are able to cover the undercovered stories and shift to explaining to people, this is the debate over the minimum wage. Here's the truth about how it could affect your life. Here's what this $1,400, like, recover the news in a way that is about how it impacts people's lives, because we have the pacing and the time to do it now. And I do believe that's what the audience wants.
I could not agree more. Well, it is, I love talking to you, and we could have this conversation for hours more, but
I'm so happy hearing your voice.
I
It's like waking up.
Yeah, we should do this a lot more often.